The court gasped as the ruthless Duke broke his silence at last. His voice roared across the ballroom. "You dare call my wife a traitor? Guards, arrest her!" In front of every noble, he seized Lilith's trembling hand and pulled her to his side. Then, shocking them all, he kissed her, claiming the woman they had mocked as nothing more than his mask. But this story did not begin with triumph. It began with humiliation, with whispers, with a girl the court swore would never belong to the Duke.
The chandeliers glimmered above the grand ballroom like 1,000 captive stars, but Lilith's eyes saw only the reflection of her own unease in the polished marble floors. She had not been born for this world. Once her family's name had carried respect, their fortune strong enough to command invitations to halls like these. But scandal had shattered it all, leaving only whispers, debts, and disgrace. The Duke's proposal had not come out of love. She knew that from the moment the offer was placed before her family like a verdict. To him she was not a bride but a shield, a quiet woman to soften his cold reputation, proof that he could play the part of duty. To her he was a lifeline, however sharp and cutting the hold might be. Marriage to Aaron meant survival. Still, as she stepped into the blaze of light and eyes turned to her, she felt every seam of her borrowed gown tighten with the weight of their judgment. She was Lilith, daughter of ruin, now dressed in silk that did not quite fit, carrying a title she had not earned. The court did not see a duchess. They saw an impostor. Conversations fell into sharp-edged whispers the moment she crossed the threshold. Fans lifted to hide smirks, jewels glittered on throats that bent together in cruel laughter. She walked as though through a gauntlet, each step betraying the tremor in her knees. I must endure. I must not let them see me break. Across the room, Aaron stood surrounded by allies and enemies alike, his posture precise, his face unreadable. He was admired, feared, even hated, but never ignored. His reputation for ruthless victories in court and cold dismissals of affection had carved him into legend. And now, with Lilith at his side, he presented an image of respectability. An image, nothing more. She moved toward him, her palms damp against the silk of her gown. When she reached him, he did not smile or even turn to her fully. Only the briefest flicker of his gaze touched her before returning to the nobleman in conversation. To the watching eyes of the court, it was confirmation. She was not chosen for love. She was chosen for appearances. The orchestra swelled, a waltz filling the hall. Rosalie, radiant in crimson, her beauty honed into a weapon, stepped forward and extended her hand to Aaron. He accepted without hesitation. Lilith felt the weight of every gaze shift toward her, waiting for a flinch, a protest. She stood very still, spine aching with the effort not to crumble. The whispers sharpened. She doesn't even know the steps. An embarrassment. How long until he discards her? Lilith's chest tightened, but she forced her chin higher. If she gave them silence, perhaps they would tire of mocking. She turned toward the edge of the room, willing her body to glide gracefully as though she belonged. But fate betrayed her. Her heel caught in the hem of her gown. The sound of tearing fabric cut through the music like a blade. Lilith stumbled forward, arms flailing, the stem of her glass slipping from her fingers. It shattered across the marble, wine spilling like blood at her feet. Gasps rose, then laughter. Loud, merciless, echoing in every corner. Her knees struck the floor, shards glittering around her like broken stars. Rosalie's laugh rang above the rest, cruel and triumphant. Lilith's heart hammered. She lifted her head desperate, her eyes seeking Aaron. A hand, a word, anything. But he stood with arms folded, his gaze fixed on her without emotion. Cold. Distant. To the court, it was confirmation. To Lilith, it was confirmation too. She was nothing more than the mask he wore for appearance. Proof to the world that the feared Duke could claim a wife, but he wasn't good at it, because he never claimed her heart. Her fingers trembled as she pushed herself up, ignoring the sting in her palms. She forced her face still, though her cheeks burned. Around her, dancers swirled back into rhythm as though she were nothing but a shadow. Inside her chest, something cracked. Is this to be my life forever? Mocked, invisible, nothing more than a pawn in his game? The laughter faded into music, but it lived on in her bones. Still, in the quiet corner of her soul, another voice whispered, I am not nothing. I will not always be their shadow. Lilith turned her face away from the court's laughter and walked back into the fire of their whispers, every step a test of fragile dignity. If you were in Lilith's place, bound in a marriage for appearances, mocked and humiliated before the entire court, would you stay silent and endure, or defend yourself and risk even greater scandal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The laughter from the ballroom still clung to Lilith's skin long after the music had resumed, like smoke that refused to fade. She held her head high, forcing herself to glide back toward the fringes of the hall, but inside her chest, the ache deepened. The mask of composure was all she had, and she wore it tightly, even as her heart whispered how fragile it truly was. She thought back to the night everything had changed. The night her father returned home with papers in his hand and defeat in his eyes. Their family name, once spoken with respect, had been dragged through the mud in scandal. Her father's poor dealings had left them drowning in debt. Invitations to grand halls vanished. Friends who once bowed in greeting turned their faces away. Their manner, once filled with laughter, grew quiet with shame. Then came the Duke's offer, sharp as a blade. Aaron did not kneel, did not woo. He merely presented the arrangement as though it were a contract. For him, a marriage would shield his reputation, ease whispers that he was incapable of tenderness, prove to his enemies he could play the part of duty. For her family, it was salvation from ruin. For Lilith, it was survival. She had not dreamed of such a union. Secretly, she had longed for something else, for a love that saw her, truly saw her, not as a mask or a bargaining piece, but as a woman with a heart that burned quietly for belonging. She had been willing to set that dream aside for the sake of her family. But nights like these made her wonder if she had bartered away not just her future, but the very essence of herself. As she stood against the wall, her maid and confidant Amaris slipped to her side, carrying the quiet comfort of someone who had known her since girlhood. Amaris leaned close, her voice a whisper, beneath the hum of strings and laughter. Hold your chin higher, my lady. Do not let them see what they want to see. Lilith gave her a faint smile. They see what they wish, Amaris, and I fear it will always be so. You are stronger than their whispers, Amaris said firmly. They only laugh because they fear what they cannot crush. Before Lilith could reply, Rosalie swept past with the rustle of crimson silk. Her smile was honeyed, her voice dripping poison. What a shame, Lilith, she said sweetly, just loud enough for others to hear. Even borrowed jewels cannot turn scandal into grace. Perhaps next time you will remain at home. Lilith's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had learned silence was sometimes the only shield left to her. Rosalie's laughter trailed after her like a stain, and Lilith forced herself to breathe evenly. Aaron had returned to his circle of allies, his voice low and commanding. Though she could not hear his words, the ripple of unease that spread among the men gathered around him was enough to confirm his reputation. He was not merely respected, he was feared. He had brought down rivals with the flick of a signature, crushed families with a smile, carved out his place as one of the most dangerous men in court. And yet, the rumors never stopped. That he was incapable of love. That he did not even desire it. That his blood ran cold and his heart was iron. To stand at his side was to share in his shadow, not his light. Lilith had agreed to it, but now she bore the full weight of that choice. Later that evening, as the guests began to thin, Dalton approached Aaron's side. The Duke's advisor was a man of sharp features and sharper mind, his loyalty unwavering but his eyes always calculating. Dalton leaned close to Aaron, speaking low, though Lilith caught fragments. The appearance works. Your enemies have grown quieter, but But do not soften, my lord. The moment you show sentiment, they will smell weakness. Aaron's reply was a murmur, but his eyes flicked briefly toward Lilith. She caught it, the briefest flicker of something unguarded, before the stone mask returned. When at last they returned to their carriage, the night air cool against her burning skin, Lilith settled into her seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Amaris sat opposite, her gaze protective, while Aaron remained silent beside her. The horses jolted forward, hooves striking the cobblestones like thunder. "Does it wound you so deeply to see them laugh?" Aaron's voice broke the silence at last, low and unreadable. Lilith turned her head, surprised he had spoken to her at all. "It wounds me to see you stand with them," she admitted softly, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath. He studied her, his golden brown eyes catching the glow of the lantern light. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something there, a crack in the ice, a flicker of regret. But it vanished, shuttered as quickly as it had come. "You knew what this was," he said finally. "This marriage was never meant for love. It is duty. It is survival." Her heart clenched at the word. Survival. Yes, she had agreed for that reason. But hearing it spoken so plainly was another wound, one deeper than the laughter of the court. She turned her gaze to the darkened streets beyond the window, whispering so softly Amaris might be the only one to hear, "Even duty cannot stop a heart from longing." The carriage fell silent again, but the words lingered. In the weeks that followed, the pattern repeated. Balls, dinners, councils, all places where Lilith was paraded as the Duke's mask. All places where Rosalie's sharp tongue or the sly murmurs of nobles reminded her she was nothing more than a pawn. Yet in the quiet moments, when no one else watched, Aaron betrayed himself. A hand steadying her when she nearly tripped on the palace steps. A glance that lingered a moment too long. A silence when Dalton urged him to dismiss her as irrelevant. He did not speak his thoughts, but Lilith felt them pressing against her skin. He was cold, yes, he was feared, yes, but there was something beneath it, something she could not yet name. And so she endured. Every day a battle fought with silence and dignity. Every night she carried the same prayer. Let me not be nothing. Let me be seen, even if only once. If you were in Lilith's place, enduring daily humiliation while catching only fleeting glimpses of warmth from a man feared by all, would you hold on to the faint hope of love, or guard your heart and accept only survival? Share your thoughts below. The feast blazed with golden light, chandeliers spilling brilliance across tables heavy with silver and crystal. Perfumed air clung to Lilith's throat, sweet and suffocating, as she entered on Aaron's arm. She had learned to school her face into composure, even as her heart beat a little faster with every eye that turned her way. The memory of her last public humiliation, her stumble, the laughter, the sound of shattering glass, still echoed in her mind. Tonight she prayed to slip through the evening with quiet invisibility, but the court never allowed her such mercy. They looked at her as though she were a blemish against Aaron's sharp perfection. Her gown, though new, lacked the richness of Rosalie's silks. Her jewels, though borrowed, did not gleam with the fire of heirlooms passed through centuries of noble blood. She was tolerated only because Aaron's cold acceptance made her untouchable. And yet, every whisper, every sidelong glance reminded her that acceptance was an illusion. Aaron remained the same as ever, poised, unreadable, his face a mask of cool indifference. He spoke to lords and councilmen with clipped precision, his presence commanding silence without effort. At his side, Lilith played her part, standing quiet, smiling faintly, never stepping forward unless spoken to. She was the shadow of his reputation, and nothing more. The orchestra swelled, signaling the beginning of speeches. Goblets raised, nobles offered hollow toasts, voices dripping with praise that masked venom. Rosalie stepped forward, her crimson gown rippling like fire as she claimed the center of attention. She bowed her head gracefully to Aaron, her smile sharp as glass. "My Lord Duke," Rosalie began, voice honeyed yet piercing, "we are all in awe of your generosity. To take under your wing one so Unprepared for the rigors of our world is no small act. Truly it is charity in its highest form. The words slid across the room like poison. Murmurs spread, laughter muffled behind jeweled hands. Lilith's blood froze, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. Rosalie's eyes glittered as she turned toward her, the smile widening. After all, she continued sweetly, a ruined family such as hers would rarely find themselves in such company again. Fortune may flee, but how lucky she is to find refuge at your side, my lord. The laughter broke free, sharp and cruel. Lilith felt the ground tilt beneath her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wanted to speak, to fight back, but her voice locked in her throat. She lifted her chin, but the heat burning behind her eyes betrayed her. Her gaze darted to Aaron. He stood still, his expression unchanged, his eyes fixed on Rosalie with the same cold detachment he showed everyone. He did not rebuke her. He did not silence the room. His inaction confirmed what they all believed. She was nothing but his mask, his appearance of duty. The humiliation cut deeper than laughter. It was the confirmation that she truly stood alone. The feast continued, though for Lilith each word, each laugh seemed louder, sharper. She moved through the night with mechanical grace, speaking little, smiling when forced, her heart shrinking with every passing moment. It was only later, when the hall had thinned and she lingered in the corridor outside the chamber doors, that the air shifted. She turned a corner and froze. Rosalie stood there, her voice lowered, speaking directly to Aaron. "You could do better," Rosalie purred, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Everyone sees it. She's weak. She will drag you down. Cast her aside, and the court will understand. They will even applaud it." Lilith's breath caught. She could not move, not when the words pierced her like arrows. She pressed herself against the stone wall, hidden in shadow, desperate to hear Aaron's reply. His silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then his voice came, low, sharp, a blade beneath velvet. "Enough, Rosalie." The words cracked like thunder in the still corridor. Lilith's eyes widened. Aaron stepped closer, his presence radiating a chill that made even Rosalie falter. "Do not mistake my silence for permission," he said, his voice colder than ice. "Speak her name with such disdain again, and you will find the consequences are not worth the pleasure." Rosalie's painted smile wavered, her eyes flickering with a moment of fear. She bowed quickly, murmuring some apology, and swept away with her silks trailing behind her. Lilith stood frozen, her chest tight. She had expected nothing. She had braced herself for Aaron's indifference. But what she had heard was different. It was not warmth, not affection, but protection. A line drawn, sharp and undeniable. When Aaron turned, his eyes flicked toward the shadow where she stood. For a heartbeat, their gazes locked. His eyes lingered too long, something unreadable sparking within them, before he shifted and walked past without a word. Her heart raced, confusion swirling through the pain. His cruelty was still there. His silence at the feast had cut her deeply. But that moment, that single sharp defense, made her question what lay beneath his mask. Later, alone in her chamber, Lilith sat by the flickering candlelight, her thoughts in turmoil. She replayed the night over and over. Rosalie's venom, Aaron's silence, his later defense. Which was the truth? Was he truly the cold man the world feared, or was there something hidden beneath the armor he had built? She pressed her hands to her chest, whispering into the darkness. Is his cruelty real? Or only the mask he wears? The question lingered, heavy and dangerous, refusing to let her sleep. If you were Lilith, humiliated by the court yet glimpsing unexpected protection from a man who seems incapable of love, would you dare to believe in the hidden warmth, or would you guard your heart against disappointment? Share your thoughts in the comments. The days after the feast unfolded with the same precision as a blade being sharpened, smooth to the eye yet dangerous beneath the surface. Lilith carried herself through the corridors of the palace with quiet dignity, though each glance, each whisper, reminded her of her place in the court's cruel hierarchy. Still, something had shifted. Aaron's cold defense in the corridor lingered in her mind. It was not affection, not tenderness, but it was something. And for Lilith, who had braced herself for nothing, even that sliver of protection became a fragile ember she could not ignore. It was during a morning walk through the gardens that she felt it again. She moved carefully over the gravel path, her gaze fixed on the blooming roses that arched in crimson arcs over the trellises. The silk hem of her gown caught on a jagged stone, and she stumbled. Before she could fall, a steady hand closed around her wrist. Aaron. He had been behind her, speaking with Dalton, and now he held her, his grip firm and unyielding. For a heartbeat, his eyes locked with hers. No one else was near enough to see, but in that moment, she caught it, the flicker of concern, sharp and unguarded, before his expression shuttered once more. He released her hand as if it burned, turning back to Dalton with his usual poise. Lilith's breath hitched. She pressed her fingers to the spot where he had held her, the warmth lingering. For all the court's laughter, for all his distance, he had not let her fall. Later, in the great hall, she dared something she had never done before. As Rosalie swept past, dripping with venomous charm, Lilith did not lower her eyes. Instead, she smiled, not sweetly, but with a quiet defiance that made Rosalie falter mid-step. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Aaron saw it. From across the hall, his eyes followed her. For once there was no disdain in his gaze. If anything, there was the faintest edge of curiosity, as though he too was seeing her differently. But the court was relentless. Whispers grew louder with each passing week. They said Lilith would not last, that Aaron would discard her as soon as appearances no longer demanded her presence. Rosalie, ever the viper, fanned the rumors until they spread like fire. "She's a placeholder," Rosalie told a cluster of women one evening, her voice carrying easily to where Lilith stood. "Once the Duke tires of his charity, he will take a true duchess to his side. Everyone knows it." Lilith's cheeks burned, but she did not bow her head. Instead, she stepped forward into the circle of light, her voice clear and steady. "Then let them say what they will," she said. "I was not chosen to please them." The room fell silent. For the first time, the nobles blinked, unsettled by her poise. Lilith turned and walked away, her gown sweeping behind her like a banner of quiet rebellion. That night, Aaron entered her chamber without warning. She stood by the fire, the glow painting her features in amber. He said nothing at first, only studied her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You spoke boldly," he said finally. "Do you enjoy stirring the wolves?" Lilith lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "They laugh whether I speak or not. At least this way I choose the words." For a moment, the corner of his mouth curved, almost a smile. "You are not as fragile as they believe." The warmth in his tone unsettled her, more than cruelty ever could. She found herself daring to tease. "And what do you believe, my lord?" His eyes lingered on hers, the silence thick with something unspoken. Then he turned, his voice cool once more. "That appearances must be kept." He left before she could answer, but the flicker of warmth remained etched in her chest. Days blurred into nights, the tension between them taut as a bowstring. Aaron grew increasingly unsettled by his own reactions. He told himself it was nothing, that he was only protecting the arrangement, the mask they had crafted. But when he saw her smile at Amaris in the garden, or heard her laughter echo softly in the corridors, he felt the cracks widening in the armor he had worn for years. Dalton noticed too. One evening, as Aaron reviewed documents in his study, Dalton leaned forward, voice low. "You are changing, my lord. The court whispers of your wife, and some say you are softening. I remind you, appearances matter. Do not let sentiment undo the foundation you have built." Aaron's jaw tightened. He did not reply, but his hand stilled over the parchment. Softening. The word struck him like a curse, and yet he could not deny it. That same week, Rosalie struck again. During a lavish dinner, she rose with a goblet in her hand, her voice carrying across the table. "A toast," she declared, "to our gracious Duke for enduring what none of us could. Truly, patience is a noble virtue." The laughter that followed was sharp, cruel, unmistakably directed at Lilith. For a moment Aaron said nothing, and Lilith's heart sank. But then his hand, resting on the table, shifted. His fingers brushed hers beneath the cloth, a subtle touch hidden from the world. It was fleeting but deliberate. Her breath caught, her chest tightening with something both painful and sweet. She did not dare look at him, but she knew. He had chosen in that small moment to stand with her, even if only in secret. Lilith grew bolder after that. She no longer shrank from Rosalie's barbs. She carried herself with quiet grace, refusing to be invisible. Each act of defiance fueled her strength, and with it came Aaron's silent, unspoken approval. Still, doubt gnawed at her. Was his protectiveness real, or only another mask to preserve appearances? The question followed her like a shadow, one she could not yet answer. Aaron, for his part, wrestled with his own turmoil. Each day his resolve weakened. Each night her presence filled the silence he had once embraced. He told himself it was dangerous, that to love was to invite ruin. Yet he could not stop the pull. The storm between them built slowly, quietly, impossible to ignore. The rain came heavy that evening, drumming against the tall windows of the palace as though the storm itself sought entry. Lilith sat in the library, the fire at her side casting long shadows across the shelves, trying to lose herself in the faded ink of poetry. The words blurred, her thoughts wandering too often toward Aaron, toward the subtle moments when his hand steadied her, or when his gaze lingered too long. They were small things, but they lived in her heart like stolen treasures. She wanted to believe they meant more, but the storm outside was not the only one gathering. She had risen to return the book when voices echoed faintly down the corridor. Aaron's voice, low, commanding, answered by Dalton's clipped tone. Drawn by instinct more than intent, Lilith stepped quietly into the hall, pressing herself against the wall beside the half-open door to Aaron's study. Dalton spoke first. "My lord." The whispers grow louder. "The court tolerates her only because she serves her purpose. She softens your image, nothing more. That is what you wanted, proof to the Crown and Council that you are not entirely consumed by ice." There was a pause, the sound of Aaron's footsteps pacing across the wooden floor. Then his voice came, hard but laced with something else, something she had not expected. "Yes, Dalton, that is why I chose her. She was never meant to be anything but appearance, a symbol that I could bow to tradition without surrendering myself." Lilith's breath caught. The words cut deep, sharper than any laughter in the ballroom. She pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself, her heart cracking with every syllable. So it was true. I am nothing more than a mask, a shield for him to wield when it suits him. Yet, as she turned to flee, his voice shifted, softer now, fraying at the edges. And yet, appearances are not as simple as I once believed. Dalton's silence stretched, then he asked cautiously, "Do you regret the choice?" Another pause, heavy and long. "Regret?" Aaron's voice was quieter now, so low Lilith had to strain to hear. "Perhaps, not for what she is, but for what she makes me feel. She unsettles me, and I cannot allow it." Lilith stumbled back, her eyes stinging. She did not wait to hear more. The storm outside seemed to follow her as she fled down the corridor, the thunder echoing the turmoil in her chest. She locked herself in her chamber, her hands trembling as she sank to the floor. The words repeated in her mind. Never meant to be anything but appearance. The fragile ember of hope she had carried guttered under the weight of betrayal. Foolish. She had been foolish to believe his fleeting touches, his hidden glances, meant anything more than courtesy. She had dreamed of love in a place where it could never live. When Aaron entered later, she was still by the fire, her eyes rimmed red, though she had wiped away the tears. He stopped at the door, his figure tall and shadowed by the flickering light. For a long moment neither spoke. Finally he crossed the room, his steps deliberate, his gaze searching hers. "You have been quiet tonight." Lilith lifted her chin, her voice steady though her heart bled. Should I have been louder? Should I remind the court what I am, a decoration, an appearance, nothing more? His eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. He took a breath, and when he spoke, the words surprised her. Do you think I am untouched by this life, Lilith? That I do not know what it means to be measured only by what the world sees? She frowned, confused. He rarely spoke of himself, his life a fortress few dared enter. Now his voice carried a weight that drew her in despite herself. My childhood was not filled with affection, he continued. My father ruled with iron. My mother silenced her heart until she became a ghost in her own halls. I learned early that vulnerability is a weapon others turn against you. To survive, I became what they expected: stone, cold, untouchable. He paused, his gaze lowering for once, the mask slipping. And then you came. You were meant to be a symbol, nothing more. But you are not silent, Lilith. You make me remember what I buried long ago. That is why I cannot. He stopped himself, his jaw tightening as though the words themselves were dangerous. Lilith's heart ached. For a moment, she saw him not as the feared Duke, but as a boy who had never been allowed to feel. Yet the pain of what she had overheard pressed heavy against her chest. If I am only a symbol to you, she whispered, then let me be that. Do not offer me glimpses of something I cannot have. His eyes snapped back to hers, sharp, almost wounded. For a moment he looked as though he might reach for her, but then his hand fell to his side, clenched tight. The silence between them was thick, the storm outside raging like an echo of the one within. Lilith turned her gaze away, her voice barely audible. I will endure their laughter. I will endure being nothing more than your appearance. But I will not endure hope if it is false. Aaron's breath caught, though he masked it quickly. He gave no answer, only turned and left the chamber, the door closing with a heavy finality. Alone, Lilith pressed her hands against her chest, her heart a battlefield of longing and despair. She had dreamed of being seen, of being chosen. But now she faced the truth. To survive, she might have to bury her own heart, just as he had buried his. And yet, even as she whispered this resolve to herself, she could not erase the memory of his voice, softer than she had ever heard it. She unsettles me. The stakes had risen higher than she could have imagined. To stay meant humiliation, perhaps even heartbreak. To resist meant risking everything, her place, her family's fragile survival, even her soul. She closed her eyes against the fire's glow, the question heavy as the storm beyond the window. Would she endure a lifetime of silence, or dare demand to be more than a mask? If you were Lilith, would you accept being only an appearance or risk everything to demand love and respect? Share your thoughts below. The great hall of the royal court glittered with gold and silver, the chandeliers casting their light across polished marble as nobles gathered in their finest attire. Music drifted softly from the far corner, but the true performance was in the eyes and voices of the court, sharp, prying and merciless. Lilith entered on Aaron's arm, her gown of pale silk, chosen carefully by Amaris to radiate dignity despite its simplicity. She held her head high, though her pulse raced. Every time she crossed such thresholds, the weight of scrutiny pressed harder upon her shoulders. She reminded herself of the small victories she had claimed in recent weeks, standing taller, speaking clearer, daring to meet their gaze. Tonight, she told herself, would be no different. But Rosalie was waiting. The rival noblewoman shimmered in emerald silk, her jewels blazing beneath the candlelight. She had chosen her moment well, at the heart of the gathering when all ears were eager for entertainment. Rosalie's voice rang out, smooth and deadly. How noble of our Duke to take in such unfortunate stock. A ruined name, wasn't it? Yes, I recall the scandal vividly. Treachery in trade, whispers of betrayal to the crown itself. Such shame clings forever, does it not? It is said blood tells in the end. A ripple of laughter spread through the hall. Lilith's blood ran cold. Her family's disgrace had always haunted her, but never before had someone dared accuse them of treason aloud. She felt the room's eyes pierce her like 1,000 knives. Her spine stiffened. She would not be broken so easily. "Better ruined and honest," she said, her voice firm, though it trembled within, "than gilded in lies and cruelty." Gasps fluttered across the hall. For a heartbeat, silence fell, but Rosalie only smiled, her teeth gleaming like a predator's. How charming to hear the daughter of traitors speak of honesty. "Tell us, Lady Lilith, was it honesty that lost your family its lands? Was it honesty that left you begging for a husband to save you?" The laughter returned, louder this time, merciless. Lilith's chest constricted, her vision blurring as tears threatened. She tried to hold her ground, but Rosalie's venom was sharper than steel. "I—" Lilith's voice faltered. Her words tangled in her throat. Her heart screamed to flee, to escape the mockery, the eyes, the laughter. She felt the marble floor tilt beneath her feet, her body trembling as humiliation swallowed her whole. Her gaze darted to Aaron. He stood as ever, cold, unreadable, his face a mask of stone. He did not move, did not silence Rosalie, did not reach for her. The sight hollowed her. She turned, nearly stumbling as she fled the hall, her gown dragging like chains behind her. The corridors blurred around her as she ran, her breath ragged. She burst into a side chamber, clutching the doorframe, her body shuddering with silent sobs. She had dared to dream she could be seen, that she could matter, but tonight Rosalie had torn away every fragile thread of dignity she had woven. Amaris found her minutes later, kneeling at her side, her voice thick with worry. "My lady." "I cannot do this," Lilith whispered, broken. "I thought I was stronger, but I was wrong. To them, I will always be nothing. And to him," her voice cracked, "to him, I am only an appearance." Footsteps echoed faintly in the hall. She froze, certain it was Aaron, but the figure that slipped inside was Dalton. His eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a man who carried tidings he knew would wound. "My lady," he said smoothly, "perhaps this is for the best. The Duke cannot afford such weakness at his side. There is talk, serious talk, that an annulment may be arranged. Quietly, of course. It would ease his burden, restore his standing. You would be free of this life." Lilith's breath caught, her body going cold. Annulment, cast aside, forgotten, discarded as though she had never mattered at all. She stared at Dalton, her voice barely a whisper. "Does he want this?" Dalton tilted his head. "He considers it. For political ease, you understand. His enemies grow bold, and you give them cause." The words crushed her. She could not even summon anger, only despair. She turned her face away, hiding her tears as her heart broke anew. When Dalton left, the chamber was silent save for her ragged breathing. Amaris took her hands, trying to anchor her. "Do not listen to him. Do not let them take your spirit." Lilith shook her head, her voice hollow. "My spirit is all I had left, and tonight even that is gone." She thought of Aaron, his silence as Rosalie struck, his mask unbroken while her heart shattered. She had longed to believe his rare moments of warmth meant something, but now it was clear. They were illusions. A man of stone could not love, and a woman like her had no place beside him. The dream she had clung to, of love, of belonging, of being seen, crumbled in her hands. She pressed her forehead against the cool stone wall, whispering into the shadows, "I am nothing, and I was a fool to think I could ever be more." Outside, the storm of laughter still echoed through the palace, but within Lilith, another storm raged, a storm of despair, loss, and the fading light of hope. The palace felt colder in the days that followed, though the hearths burned bright and the corridors echoed with endless chatter. Lilith withdrew into silence, her steps softer, her presence dimmer. She spoke little at meals, avoided the grand gatherings, and drifted like a shadow through halls that once mocked her openly. Yet to Aaron, her silence was louder than any insult Rosalie had ever thrown. He watched her from a distance, the way her chin no longer lifted as high, the way her smile never reached her eyes. She had always carried herself with fragile dignity, enduring cruelty with a quiet defiance that unsettled even him. But now that spark flickered dangerously low, and Aaron felt something twist in his chest. For years he had built his life on control. Appearances had been his shield, cruelty his weapon. He had told himself she was only part of that mask, a necessary symbol to silence his enemies. But watching her wilt beneath the weight of humiliation and his own silence, Aaron could no longer lie. Not to himself. She mattered. She had always mattered. And the thought of losing her, of watching Dalton's whisper of annulment become reality, filled him with a fear so sharp it burned through his iron armor. One evening, as rain streaked the windows and thunder rolled in the distance, Aaron found her in the west wing, sitting by the unlit fire. A book lay open on her lap, but her eyes stared past the words, distant and empty. "Lilith," he said softly. She started, then lowered her gaze, murmuring, "My lord." The title cut him like a knife. She had never spoken it with such distance before. He crossed the room, his footsteps slow, deliberate, as though approaching a frightened bird. For once he did not hold himself tall and untouchable. His voice was low, almost rough. "You must not think I am blind to what was done to you. I heard Rosalie's venom. I saw your pain." Her eyes flickered toward him, a spark of bitterness beneath the sadness. "And you chose silence." Again. He flinched. The truth of her words weighed heavier than any accusation he had ever faced in court. He sank into the chair opposite her, his hands clasping tightly, as though bracing against his own confession. "I have been a coward," he said, his voice low. "I told myself cruelty was strength, that distance was protection, that appearances were all that mattered. But watching you suffer, watching you carry yourself with more dignity than any noble in that hall, something in me cracked." Lilith's breath hitched. She searched his face, waiting for the mask to return, but this time it did not. His eyes, once guarded, now shone with unguarded truth. "I have kept you in shadows," he continued. "I let you believe you were nothing more than a mask for my reputation. But the truth, Lilith, the truth is that you have undone me. Your strength, your courage, it has broken through the armor I swore I would never shed. And I find myself afraid." "Afraid," she whispered. His jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Afraid of what I feel for you. Afraid of what it means to love when I swore I could not. Afraid that I have already destroyed what chance I might have had to earn your heart." The silence stretched, heavy and trembling. Lilith's chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, her heart caught between longing and disbelief. "Why say this now?" she asked softly. "When the world has already decided I am nothing?" "Because the world is wrong," Aaron said, his voice fierce now, his mask gone completely. "And I will prove it. I will not remain silent again. I will cast aside appearances, risk scandal, face every enemy in court, whatever it takes. I will show them and you that you are not nothing. You are everything." Her eyes filled, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Aaron." He leaned forward, his hand hovering just above hers, waiting, trembling. "If you will let me, I will stand at your side, not as a mask, not as an arrangement, but as a man who loves the woman the world tried to break." For a moment she could not speak, the weight of his words pressed against every scar in her heart. Yet when she finally placed her hand over his, her touch was steady. "Then do not speak it only to me," she whispered. "Prove it before them all." Aaron's eyes burned with resolve. He rose, pulling her gently to her feet. "I will. At the next gathering, before the court that mocked you, I will shatter every whisper with the truth. No one will dare call you less again." Lilith's heart ached with hope so sharp it frightened her, but she did not let go of his hand. For the first time, she saw not the feared duke, not the cold mask, but the man beneath. The man who had chosen her, who now vowed to claim her openly. And as the storm raged outside, a different storm built within Aaron, not of fear, but of love, fierce enough to burn every false appearance to ash. If you were Aaron, would you risk scandal and reputation to defend the one you love, or cling to silence for safety? Share your thoughts below. The grandest gala of the season burned with light and colour. every corner of the palace hall alive with gold-threaded gowns, jeweled masks, and voices that dripped with ambition. Tonight, the entire nobility of the kingdom had gathered under one roof. Chandeliers hung like constellations, the floor polished to a mirrored sheen. Music swelled, laughter rippled, and beneath it all, tension coiled like a blade waiting to strike. Lilith entered at Aaron's side, her heart steady but fragile. She had prepared herself for the firestorm. The sting of past humiliations lingered in her bones, but tonight something within her had changed. Aaron's confession days earlier, his vow to prove her worth before the court, had planted a trembling seed of hope. Still, doubts gnawed at her. Would he truly act when the moment came? Or would she once again be left to weather the storm alone? The hall shifted as Rosalie approached, her emerald gown blazing under candlelight, her smile sharp enough to cut. She had been waiting for this moment, and Lilith knew it. Rosalie curtsied to Aaron with exaggerated grace, then turned, her voice pitched to carry across the crowd. "How noble our Duke is," she said sweetly, her words dripping venom, "to endure so bravely what none of us could, to carry upon his arm the daughter of ruin, to bear the shame of a family stained with whispers of treason. Truly, it is charity beyond measure." The hall gasped. Then laughter followed, low, cruel, merciless. Nobles leaned together, their eyes glittering with delight at the spectacle. Lilith's breath caught, her chest tightening. The wound struck deeper than before. Rosalie had not merely mocked her, but branded her family traitors before the crown itself. Lilith's lips parted, her voice trembling as she tried to answer. "My family." But Rosalie's words sliced over hers. "Your family bartered dignity for coin and lost both. Do not deny it, Lady Lilith. The court remembers." The laughter swelled again, crueler now. Lilith's vision blurred, her cheeks burning with shame. She felt herself shrinking, retreating into the old silence. But then, Aaron moved. The room stilled as he stepped forward, his tall figure cutting through the crowd like a blade through silk. For the first time, he did not remain at a distance. He crossed the floor, each stride deliberate, his face unreadable but his presence commanding silence. When he reached Lilith, he took her hand, not gently, but firmly, possessively, as though anchoring her to the ground itself. The hall held its breath, his voice rang out low and dangerous, carrying through every corner of the hall. "Enough," Rosalie faltered, her smirk wavering. "My lord, I only speak the truth." Aaron's gaze snapped to her, sharp as steel. "You speak lies dressed in venom. You mock my wife, and in doing so, you mock me. You slander her family with words you cannot prove, and in my hall, before my court, that is treason enough." Gasps erupted. The word treason thundered louder than any music. "Guards," Aaron commanded, his voice like thunder. "Remove Lady Rosalie from my sight. She will answer for her slander before the crown." The crowd broke into chaos as armored guards moved swiftly, seizing Rosalie's arms. She struggled, her voice shrill. "You cannot. I only spoke what everyone whispers." Aaron's glare silenced her. And whispers die when spoken without honor. "Take her." Rosalie was dragged from the hall, her protests echoing uselessly behind her. Nobles shifted, stunned, whispering furiously. Never before had Aaron shown such public fury. Never before had he risked his reputation for anyone, but he was not finished. Still holding Lilith's trembling hand, Aaron turned to the assembly. His eyes swept the hall, daring anyone to meet them. "Hear me now. This woman you scorned, this duchess you mocked, she is not a pawn, not a mask, not a burden. She is my chosen equal, my wife, my heart, and any who dare question her worth will find themselves answering to me." The silence that followed was heavy, stunned, absolute. No one laughed. No one whispered. The power in his words shattered the cruel chorus that had haunted Lilith since the day she entered the court. Her breath trembled, her chest tight with emotion. For the first time, she was not a shadow. She was seen. She was claimed, not as an appearance, but as his. Aaron turned then, his gaze softening as it fell upon her. Without hesitation, he drew her close and pressed his lips to hers, not in secrecy, not in shadow, but in the full blaze of the court's eyes. Gasps rang through the hall. Some nobles looked away in shock, others in awe, but none could deny what they saw. The feared Duke, the man of ice, burning with love for the woman they had tried to destroy. When he pulled back, his voice was for her alone. Never again will you stand alone, not while I draw breath. Tears blurred her vision, but her smile broke through at last. For the first time she believed it. For the first time she was not merely enduring, she was living. The hall erupted, not in laughter this time, but in murmurs of disbelief, of shifting power, of a new truth that could not be undone. And at the center of it, hand in hand, stood Aaron and Lilith, no longer appearance and shadow but husband and wife, equal and unshakable. If you were Aaron, would you risk your reputation for love, or stay hidden behind appearances? Let us know in the comments. The aftermath of that night rippled through the kingdom like a storm breaking into sunlight. The court had expected silence from Aaron, had expected his cold indifference to prevail as it always had. Instead, they had witnessed fire. Fire turned not against an enemy on the battlefield or a rival in council chambers, but against cruelty itself, in defense of a woman they had scorned. The memory of his words, his fury, his kiss, burned itself into every mind. And from that night forward, no one dared laugh at Lilith again. Whispers still moved through the palace halls, but they carried a different tone now. Where once there had been sneers of mockery, there was awe, curiosity, even envy. Women who had once turned their backs now curtsied with lowered eyes. Men who had dismissed her as a weakling now offered polite words, hesitant but sincere. The same courtiers who had once mocked her trembling hands now studied her with something dangerously close to respect. For Lilith, the change was dizzying. She walked through the palace gardens with her head held high, not out of defiance, but out of newfound confidence. She no longer shrank from the sharp eyes of the nobility. She no longer felt like a shadow clinging to Aaron's side. She had been tested, broken, and remade in the fire of humiliation. And from its ashes, she rose not as the trembling girl who had stumbled on polished marble, but as a duchess who knew her own worth. Aaron saw it too. He watched her with quiet intensity as she greeted guests, spoke with clarity, and carried herself with grace. Where once he had seen her as an appearance to protect his image, he now saw her as the woman who had dismantled his armor, piece by piece. Her strength unsettled him still, but no longer with fear. Now it filled him with pride. The council meetings changed as well. Dalton, once so firm in his insistence on appearances, grew cautious. He could not deny the shift in the Duke himself. Aaron no longer wielded only cold logic. He spoke with conviction, with passion, with the fire of a man who knew what he fought for. Some scoffed at his newfound warmth, but others admired it. Respect was no longer granted only because of his ruthlessness, but because of his devotion. The night after Rosalie's removal, the palace was quiet. The echo of music and laughter from the gala had faded, leaving only the soft crackle of fire in Aaron's private chambers. Lilith sat before the flames, her gown exchanged for a simple robe, her hair loose over her shoulders. She stared into the firelight, her mind still heavy with the memory of what had happened. Aaron entered silently, his presence filling the room as it always did. But tonight, the weight he carried was different. He stood behind her for a moment, watching the light dance across her face. Then he stepped closer, his voice low, stripped of its usual command. "Lilith." She turned, her eyes meeting his. There was no mask now, no coldness. Only him. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in his. The sight of the feared Duke kneeling before anyone, even his wife, would have sent shockwaves through the court. But here, in the quiet sanctuary of firelight, it was only them. "I have wronged you," he said softly. "From the beginning, I made you feel like nothing more than a shield. I let you believe you were alone. I let you suffer when I should have protected you. And still you stood, stronger than I deserved, stronger than I was." Her throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. She had waited for words like these, had dreamed of them. And now they were here, more real than she had imagined. "You changed me," he continued. "I thought love was weakness. I thought distance was strength, but you—" He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her skin. "You made me see that true strength is standing with the one who matters most. And you, Lilith, you are the only one who matters." Her tears fell then not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming flood of relief and love. She cupped his face in her hands, her voice trembling. "And you, Aaron, you are no longer the mask I feared. You are the man I prayed was hidden beneath, and now I am proud to call you mine." He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes as though savoring the moment. Then, with slow deliberation, he drew her into his arms. Their lips met, not with the desperation of the public kiss that had shattered appearances, but with the intimacy of two souls who had finally found their truth. When they parted, Lilith rested her forehead against his, whispering, "What began as appearance has become truth." "And it always will be," he murmured back. The fire crackled softly, wrapping them in warmth. For the first time, there was no audience, no whispers, no eyes waiting to mock or judge. There was only love, quiet, steady, and real. Days turned into weeks, and the transformation became undeniable. Lilith, once the trembling outsider mocked at every feast, now walked into gatherings as a duchess whose presence commanded silence. Not because she wielded cruelty, but because she carried grace. She became a patron of charities, a voice for those ignored by society, her resilience shining as brightly as her beauty. Aaron stood at her side, not as a cold strategist, but as a man unafraid of love. He no longer sought respect through fear alone. He earned it through devotion, through the way his gaze lingered on Lilith, the way his hand never strayed far from hers, the way he silenced whispers with a glance before they could ever reach her ears again. The court, which had once scorned her, now whispered a different story. That the Duchess had tamed the ruthless Duke, and that in doing so had transformed him into something greater. But for Lilith, the truest victory was simpler. She was no longer invisible, no longer mocked, no longer alone. She had found love not in spite of her pain, but because of it. She had become the Duchess they could not forget. That night, as she and Aaron stood on the balcony overlooking the city, the moon casting its silver glow across the rooftops, she leaned against him, her heart at peace. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. She turned to him, her smile radiant. "Not for a single moment." Their lips met once more, sealing not just a vow of love, but a future built on hope, redemption, and truth. And as the city slept below, the Duke and Duchess stood together, not as appearance, not as shadow, but as equals, as lovers, as the story the world would never forget. Do you believe love can truly grow from a marriage of convenience? Share your thoughts below.